Hi ladies, so since I can't be in class today, I really quickly want to take you through chapters 1 through 3 of Wuthering Heights and point out some of the significant themes, ideas, and motifs that we see introduced in these chapters. So I want to start with the character Joseph. He is a servant at Wuthering Heights and he plays more of a secondary role, but he's still significant, and it's frustrating because we can't always understand what Joseph is saying, and that's because he has a really strong vernacular, and that's an important term to know. So I would write down this definition. Vernacular or dialect is the language spoken by the ordinary people of a particular region or county. And so that's why Joseph speaks in such a strange way. He is speaking in the Yorkshire dialect or vernacular, and Yorkshire is the county where Wuthering Heights is set. And of course you also know that Wuthering Heights is specifically set in the moors, which is basically a type of land that's very rough, very dry, very rugged, and that sets the tone for the novel and some of the rough violence that will occur in the moors and specifically in Wuthering Heights, which is the house that most of the action of the novel occurs in. So that's the first thing. Next, I do want to remind you that if you want to see what Joseph is saying, you should turn to the back of the novel, to the appendix, where some of the footnotes are explained. So if you ever see a subscript, which is the little number in the air next to some of the text, that means you need to flip to the back, and there will be an explanation about that piece of text. So typically in the back you'll find translations of what Joseph is saying if you ever see a number right next to some of the more difficult lines that we can't quite understand. Moving on from that, I want to address Heathcliff, because we get a lot of characterization of Heathcliff in the first chapter specifically. So in that first chapter, if you look at page 5, Heathcliff is described as a gypsy. So Lockwood, our narrator, writes at the bottom of page 5, he is a dark-skinned gypsy in aspect, in dress and manners a gentleman. So Heathcliff seems to have two competing sides. First, he's a dark-skinned gypsy, and gypsy here just means non-English. He doesn't look like everyone else. His skin is a little bit darker. He seems to have maybe an unclear ethnicity. He just doesn't look like someone from Yorkshire. And so automatically, just from this description, we know that Heathcliff stands out from everyone else, and he's a bit of an outcast. So be on the lookout for ways in which Heathcliff is in fact an outcast. Then Lockwood says, in dress and manners, a gentleman. So even though Heathcliff looks like a gypsy, he looks like maybe someone who is an outcast, someone who's a little bit lower class, he dresses and acts like a gentleman. So we're going to find out more about Heathcliff as we go on, and we're going to find out what made him this way. You know, why is he a gypsy in the middle of the moors of England, and why does he dress and act like a gentleman? So be on the lookout for that. Next, let's talk about Lockwood himself. He is an unreliable narrator. He has come to Yorkshire and he's renting Thrushcross Grange, which is a house that Heathcliff owns, and so Heathcliff is Lockwood's landlord. Now Heathcliff doesn't live at Thrushcross Grange. Heathcliff lives at Wuthering Heights, and that's really our main setting. Wuthering Heights is a very cold, very dreary house. The word wuthering is a great word that describes sort of that very cold, rough nature of the home. It looks like it's been blasted by wind. It is surviving in a really rough environment. So Lockwood, he comes and automatically we know he's unreliable. If you look at page 13, Lockwood makes a lot of mistakes when he's speaking to us. He doesn't always get things right. He can't really tell what's going on at Wuthering Heights, and neither can we. And so Lockwood makes so many mistakes that we can't trust his account of things. So on page 13, he's trying to figure out who this girl is at Wuthering Heights. Now, we know that this girl is Kathy, and she is the daughter of a woman named Catherine. There are two Catherines in this novel, and that's a little bit tricky to keep track of. But Kathy, the one that he meets in chapters 2 and 3, is this younger Catherine, the daughter of another woman named Catherine. But Lockwood can't figure out who she is. And so in the middle of 13, he says, Mrs. Heathcliff, your wife. So he thinks that Catherine is Heathcliff's wife. And she's not. And so Heathcliff corrects him. And then Lockwood on page 14 says, oh, okay, well, this dude right here, which is Hareton Earnshaw, he says, okay, so it's your wife. And Hareton Earnshaw says, no, Catherine's not my wife either. So Lockwood can't figure out the relationship between all these people, and neither can we. We're very confused at this point. And so in the next few chapters, we're going to find out how all these people are related. And this is a great time to look at the family tree on the back of your bookmark or in your notes, because this will help you understand all of these relationships in the novel, because there are a lot, and it's very complicated. So that's the first mistake. Then on page 15, Lockwood realized he is snowed in at Wuthering Heights, and no one wants to help him. He says, how must I do, at the top of page 15? And then it says, there was no reply to my question. So everyone ignores Lockwood. And, you know, that's just the kind of person he is. He's really annoying, and no one wants to help him or listen to him. And so we can't really trust this guy. He's kind of an idiot. Then, you know, on page 3, the first page of the novel, Lockwood says that he's a misanthropist. He's someone who likes to be alone. But that's not true, because he keeps showing up at Wuthering Heights, and he wants to hang out with Heathcliff all the time. And Heathcliff is rude. Heathcliff does not want to hang out with Lockwood. And so Lockwood says he likes to be alone, but his actions tell a different story. So we can't really trust what Lockwood says, because it contradicts what he does. And then on page 13, kind of funny, Lockwood says that he's an attractive guy. So this is the bottom of 13. He says, I knew through experience that I was tolerably attractive. And he's talking about the fact that he knows that this Catherine, this younger Catherine, is attracted to him. And that, of course, could not be further from the truth. Catherine is rude to him. She clearly doesn't like him. So again, Lockwood's reading the situation all wrong. Catherine is not into him. She is super rude to him. So we cannot trust Lockwood. He's just kind of silly. He can't be trusted as a reliable narrator. And then finally, one of Lockwood's funnier mistakes is on page 11 at the very top. He is talking to Catherine, who's super rude, and he says, oh, that is such a cute chair of kittens. This is on page 11. He says, your favorites are among these, I continued, turning to an obscure cushion full of something like cats. And then Catherine observes scornfully, a strange choice of favorites. And then Lockwood looks over and realizes it's a heap of dead rabbits. And so what a silly mistake to make. He thinks that these dead rabbits are kittens. And so, you know, Lockwood's getting it all wrong. And so we realize there's a lot more to the story, and we cannot trust Lockwood as a narrator. So that brings up an interesting point about the animal motif. Animals show up a lot in Wuthering Heights, and they're very significant because animals in this novel reveal a lot about human relationships. So anytime you see animals or a description that seems animalistic to you, pay attention to it because it's going to reveal a lot about the characters. Now, speaking of those dead rabbits, I want to read to you a little piece of analysis that I think really sums up why those dead rabbits are there. Certainly, there is no place in the world of Wuthering Heights for a tame animal. Lockwood assumes that a civilized lady might have pet kittens. That the animals are dead rabbits, shot or trapped and ready for the pot, indicates his failure to understand the kill or be killed world of Wuthering Heights. And so those dead rabbits, rabbits are cuddly, nice, cute creatures. They do not belong in Wuthering Heights. Wuthering Heights is a place of violence. It's a place of revenge. And we're going to find that out in the next several chapters and as we continue the novel. Another example of the animal motif is those dogs that attack Lockwood. So again, showing that he is unwanted. And the dogs also illustrate the violence that's present in this house. So be on the lookout, again, for dogs, animals, and violence. Those are all really important things in this novel. Moving on, I also want to bring up the ghost scene in chapter 3. In that scene, Lockwood reaches his hand through a window, and the hand of a ghost grabs onto him. And that ghost is the older Catherine. So remember, two Catherines. The younger Catherine is alive, and Lockwood couldn't figure out whose wife she was. The older Catherine is dead, and that older Catherine is the ghost that Lockwood sees. Now, is it a real ghost? Is it just a figment of his imagination? We don't really know, but that's the ghost. And it's very violent. He rubs the ghost's hand against the broken glass of the window, and there's blood everywhere, and it just kind of gives you the creeps. And that's very typical of Gothic literature. So it's a huge element of Gothic literature to annotate in your text. So that ghost is interesting, but also what's interesting in that scene is the window. Windows are a huge motif in this novel. So be on the lookout for any time a window is mentioned because it's significant, and we're going to talk about that some more. And while we're at it, I do want to give you the definition of motif. Motif is a recurring idea or symbol that reveals something about a theme of a piece of literature. So be on the lookout for the animal motif and the windows motif as you continue reading. Finally, Heathcliff's past, what made him the way that he is? He is violent, he is grumpy, he is very cruel. And so we're going to find out in the next several chapters how Heathcliff grew up and how he became this awful person that he is in the present day. So as you start chapter 4, we're going to flash back in time, and we're going to learn about Heathcliff's upbringing and some of the people that he grew up with. He grew up with Catherine the ghost that Lockwood meets in chapter 3. And we see that Heathcliff and this ghost seem to have some relationship in the past. And we see that on page 28 when Heathcliff at the very bottom cries, come in, Cathy, do come, oh, do once more, oh, my heart's darling, hear me this time, Catherine, at last. So this is the first time we see passion or any vulnerability from Heathcliff. So we're going to find out about his relationship with the older Catherine, who's now deceased. So when we flash back in chapter 4, we're going to switch narrators because Mrs. Dean, or Ellen or Nellie Dean, is going to tell Lockwood, our current narrator, all about the things that happened in Wuthering Heights in the past. And she is someone who observed Heathcliff growing up and knows exactly what happened to make him the way that he is. And she's going to explain this tangled web of relationships that Lockwood cannot seem to figure out. So as we flash back, just keep in mind that we're going to switch times. And so that's something a little bit difficult to keep track of, but this is a frame narrative. So there's a story within a story. So now we're hearing the story from Lockwood's point of view, and then we're going to hear the story from Mrs. Dean's point of view as she tells the story to Lockwood. And of course, keep track of the houses in this novel. You've got Thrushcross Grange and Wuthering Heights, and they are very different, okay? So keep track of those two things. That's about it. As you're annotating, look especially at violence and revenge, and also social class. Those are some important ideas that come up in the next several chapters. That's it. Happy reading, and I'll see you all next class. Bye.